On this edition of Crime Chronicles, we come to you from Holcomb, a very small town in southwestern Kansas, where on November 15, 1959, a murder occurred which shocked this small town, the state of Kansas, and the entire country. It was also the basis for a best-selling novel by Truman Capote and several film efforts. We take a look at the in cold blood murders on this edition of Crime Chronicles. One has to be here to realize the remoteness of this location and why this murder was so unusual. After all, crime, especially violent crime, is mostly an urban phenomenon or occurs in small towns. But a murder of this magnitude in a community this small and this remote was truly unusual. Two recently released prison inmates from the Kansas prison system, Richard or Dick Hickok and Perry Smith, heard about the Clutters, specifically from a cellmate of Richard Hickok's. An inmate named Floyd Wells had once done farm work for Herb Clutter down the road here. He told Hickok in his cell that Mr. Clutter kept a safe in his house with lots of cash. Now it turns out that was not true. In fact, everyone here in Holcomb who knew the Clutters knew that Herb Clutter typically used checks to pay all his bills and very seldom carried cash, let alone had a safe in his house.
Richard Hickok told Perry Smith that this heist was a cinch, a perfect score. Nothing could go wrong. Their plan was to start a new life in Mexico after the heist. They drove over 400 miles on November 14th to reach the Clutter home in Holcomb.
In November 1959, Herb Clutter, 48 years old, was a successful businessman, a farmer actually, here in Finney County, Holcomb, Kansas. He lived with his wife Bonnie and their two children, Nancy and Kenyon, ages 16 and 15, who attended the local high school here. The Clutters had two other children who were grown and out of the homestead by this time. The house where the Clutters lives still stands. It's down the road here behind me, and it's still private property. So I had to be careful in order to avoid a trespassing charge, plus out of respect for the people who live there now, not to get too close while filming this. But you will see some stills of the Clutter home in this video. Perry Smith and Dick Hickok made their way into the Clutter house through an unlocked door. It was there they first came upon Herb Clutter. They demanded of him where he kept his money. He was tied up, bound and gagged, and taken to the basement.
They took Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon into a bathroom on the second floor of the house. Not finding the safe right away, they brought them from the bathroom. Bonnie's hands were tied in front of her. She was gagged and then tucked into a bed in a room on the second floor. Nancy's hands were tied behind her. She was not gagged, and she was also put in a bed. Hickok and Smith took Herb and Kenyon to the basement. They gagged Kenyon, tied his hands behind his back, and tied the rope to an overhead steam pipe in the furnace room. Then they cut him free and moved him to another room, bound and gagged. They set him on a small couch and placed a pillow behind his head to make him more comfortable. Finally, the killers bound and gagged Herb and pushed him down onto a mattress box on the concrete floor in the furnace room. Smith stayed in the furnace room while Hickok returned upstairs to look for the safe. Hickok returned to the basement and told Smith there was no safe. Smith, prone to fits of rage, slit Herb Clutter's throat and then shot him in the head. Moments later, Smith and Hickok re-entered the playroom where Smith shot Kenyon to death. They headed upstairs, then to the second floor, where they entered Nancy's room and shot her to death. Lastly, they shot Bonnie Clutter in the side of the head. Neither woman was sexually assaulted. While now there are several houses in close proximity to the Clutter house, at the time the closest home was about 1/2 mile away, so no one heard any gunshots from inside the home.
Killers entered the Clutter household with no intention of leaving any potential witnesses alive. They left the house with a grand total of about $60, which is about $480 in today's money. and a pair of binoculars and a radio.
Two of Nancy's friends, Nancy Ewalt and Susan Kidwell, who came by to bring Nancy to church with them, found the bodies later that Sunday morning.
To put it mildly, the people of Holcomb and Finney County were shocked and outraged over the murders of the Clutter family. Crimes like that simply did not occur in this small, sleepy town. The shock and the anger over the Clutter murders back in 1959 was only matched by the county's grief, and funeral services were packed here at the First Methodist Church in nearby Garden City.
Over 1,000 people attended the funeral for the Clutter family.
Up until that time, Truman Capote was probably best known for the novel Breakfast at Tiffany's. And one of his best friends was a fellow Southerner, a female author named Harper Lee, who was best known for the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. The two came here to Kansas to investigate, and the result was one of the best-selling nonfiction novels, a relatively new genre at the time, that was ever written and published back in 1966. In exchange for a favor for himself, Floyd Wells told authorities about his conversations with Dick Hickok while they were incarcerated. That and some other factors led Kansas Bureau of Investigation officials onto the trail of Dick Hickok and Perry Smith. They were arrested 6 weeks after the murders on December 30th, 1959 in Las Vegas. Behind me is the Finney County Courthouse. The Finney County Courthouse had never seen a case quite like this one and has never seen one since. It was here they were found guilty and sentenced to death. They were eventually executed in 1965. All of this chronicled in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
On April 14, 1965, Smith and Hickok were hanged at the Kansas State Prison near Lansing just after midnight. Hickok was executed first, Smith followed shortly. Dick Hickok was 33, Perry Smith was 36. Some claim that Capote's In Cold Blood is the first example of a nonfiction novel. Others disagree. In any case, In Cold Blood made the case an international sensation. In 1967, the first of several films surrounding the Clutter murders was released to critical acclaim and commercial success. In Cold Blood starred Robert Blake, who eventually was tried for the murder of his wife in real life, as Perry Smith, and Scott Wilson as Dick Hickok. Other depictions include a 1996 TV miniseries titled In Cold Blood, a critically acclaimed 2005 film called Capote with Philip Seymour Hoffman in the title role, Infamous, released in 2006, and Once Upon a Crime and a Crime to Remember, a 2018 docudrama.
Well, I'm here now in the Valley View Cemetery in Garden City, Kansas, a mile or so from the First Methodist Church, where the funeral service for the Clutters was held. Here are the remains of the Clutter family. You see Nancy, Bonnie, Herbert, and Kenyon. When I came here, I had a hard time finding these particular graves, as you might guess. In fact, there was no way I could find them on my own. So I found two young men who worked here and asked them, or told them I should say, that I was looking for a grave. And the online Find a Grave website had the zone and number listed for the Clutter family, but there's no way to find that out here unless you really know where you're going. So I asked these two young men somewhat awkwardly, I'm looking for a grave, but I don't know where it is, of course. And their response was, well, what's the name? And I said, Clutter. They knew right away where it was. As they say, the people from all over the world have come to look at the grave sites of the Clutter family. At the time of his death, Herbert Clutter was 48 years old. His wife Bonnie was 45 years old. Their daughter Nancy was only 16 years old, and their son Kenyon was only 15 years old. It is probably unfortunate that most people, including me, remember better the names of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok or Truman Capote, the people who became famous or infamous because of the Clutter murders. This town has never shaken off the 1959 murders of the Clutter family. In fact, it still haunts them. It just so happens last night, I was in the neighboring town of Garden City, where these cases were adjudicated, the county seat of Finney County, eating pizza at a restaurant. And the server of the restaurant, I told her why I was here. I'd say she was in her 30s. And she recalls, as a child, her friend's grandparents lived at the current Clutter house. Now, of course, this is spoken from the standpoint of a child. But she said that she was taken down the area where the Clutters lived, a very large backyard, large homestead. And the people who live here still feel the place has a sense of haunting or foreboding. Now, of course, that's most likely in people's minds. There's nothing really real to that, except for the fact that that is a murder that continues to haunt this town to this day. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of Crime Chronicles. As we delve into the darker side of human nature, we invite you to join us on our journey by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Your support helps make possible our inquiry into the sometimes unsettling but always fascinating phenomenon known as crime and justice. So hit that like and subscribe button right now and don't miss future episodes. Till then, Mark Jones, hoping you will join our Crime Chronicles community. And thanks for tuning in.